bespoke point charts, an election plot, otherwise known as a parliament seat chart. What you're seeing here is a visual representation of the US Senate, which has 100 seats, split by two major parties and a few independents in between. As you can imagine, this is very similar to our calendar circle chart, so some of the formulas may be very familiar. However, if you are ready, let's get into this. But first, please download the Senate data attached to this lesson and then open up Tableau desktop. So let's start by going to Microsoft Excel and opening our US Senator data. Let's drag the full data in. As you can see, there's a lot of records here. This is not just the current sitting, but an historical account. We're going to have some fun with this. Let's click on sheet 1. Here we go. But first, before we get started with our calculated fields, I want us to create two parameters. This is going to seem familiar to the previous exercise, but one will be called depth. Let's make that an integer and give that a number of 5. Let's create another parameter. Let's call this distance from center. Let's make the data type an integer as well. And in our case, I want us to give this the value of 3. Let's click OK. One last thing I want us to do is create a calculated field and call this full name. Quite simple calculation. First name plus space plus last name. So we're just concatenating the first and the last name together. Now we're going to start building our calculations. As with most of our point charts, we need an index, and this will be index -1. I also want to get a field called the number of senators. So let's create that calculation. And here, I want to use a level of detail. Fixed, count D, full name. I want to count the total number of full names within our query context. So let's click OK on that. Now I want us to create an item, very similar to the calendar circle. We are going to have item, index divided by depth, and we are going to wrap this around or cast this as an integer. Nice and simple so far. Let's click OK. Now let's create our X and Y. Put our items in there. We can click OK. Let's create our Y object. This will be sine, radians, item. Make sure we close the brackets. Now I want the year end. I want us to start building our visualization. So let's drag our year end onto filters. Now go to special characters. And I only want to include null values, i.e. there's no end date. I also want to, because we're using a level of detail function to get the total number of senators, I'm going to add this to a context. Beautiful. I want us to now take full name and drop that onto details. As you can see, we have points that have shown up now. The good thing is if you look at the bottom left hand corner, you can see that we have 100 marks. That's perfect because we have 100 senators. Let's take X onto the columns. Let's take Y onto the rows. Very easy so far. Last step, let's take party and drop that onto color. As you can see, we have 3 colors, which again is pretty good. Now lastly, I want us to modify our table calculations. So right click on X, go to compute using, and select full name. Look like it's getting there. Let's right click on Y, go to compute using, select full name again. Again, it's looking like it's something, but let's modify that. Let's click on X, go to edit table calculations. Let's bring in the party as well. Okay, this is pretty good, we're getting there. Let's do the same with Y. Include the party. So don't worry, we're still getting there, we're still building and developing. So now what we want to do is that we want to add a step size, i.e. we want to space this out so it completes the circle. So how will we do this? We will create a step size calculation. DC step size. Within the step size, as we're dealing with 180 degrees, we are going to divide that by a calculation. And this calculation is going to be the maximum number of senators. And we are going to divide that by depth minus 1. Now, let's modify our X and our Y. And we are going to add into that our TC step size. Let's click OK. With Y, we're going to do the same thing. So you see what's happening here is that we're creating our semicircle with circles with different circle points. Let's change our mark type now to circle. One thing that is weird is that we don't see 100 points, but if you select 1 point, you see that there are additional items. So we need to add our distance. So let's create our distance calculation. Again, it's very similar to the previous few tutorials. Let's call this TC distance. We are now going to get index modulo depth. Let's click OK. Now let's modify our X and Y again by multiplying this by TC distance. Here we go. Let's edit Y and do the same. So it looks like we're getting there. You can see we're building up slowly. However, there's still a few things that don't quite work, but let's adjust them now. So what we're going to do is go into the TC distance. And here we're going to add our distance from center parameter. So by doing this, we should now push things out. So it's getting there, you could see it, you could feel it. And that's good. Let's move things around so it looks a bit nicer. What I want us to do now is sort the order. So therefore we have reds on one side, blues on the others, and orange independents in the middle. So let's right click on our X, go to edit table calculations, and let's add a sort order here. We're going to select custom sort. We're going to select party. And let's just select maximum. And here we have it. So we've now sorted. So as you can see, we've built this out really nicely. What I want us to do now is to start focusing on cosmetics so we can increase the size. So here we go. If you hover over, you can see the party, the 2 independents, Angus King and Bernie Sanders. Again, this data is a few years old, but the principle still applies. We're going to adjust this a little bit more. What we are going to do is hide the axes since these are no longer needed. I'm going to apply some formatting. I want to get rid of the grid lines and the zero lines. Let me also get rid of the ticks. Axis ruler. There we go. Now for a bit of fun, I want us to create one more calculated field. I'm going to call this length of service, and this is going to be year using the year function, adding today, and minus year of start. This hopefully should give us the years of service for the senators. Let's click OK. Now I'm going to take this field and drop it into size. As you can see now, we have the circle size by length of service. But what I want to do is, let's increase this a bit more just to have a fun effect. Let's click on color, take the transparency down to say 80% maybe. Let's rename this to our output. And here we have it. We've built ourselves a election plot. We have 5 points per ring, or 5 points going outwards. We have a distance from the center. Our depth is what we define here. And again, we can play with this by manipulating our parameters. But the key thing here is that we're using pretty much the same techniques as we did with our calendar circle charts, but we're fixing this onto 180 degrees. So I hope you was able to follow along. I hope you picked up a few things. Have a look at the different calculations, try to understand them, modify them, and see what differences they make. The key behind this is practice makes perfect, and we are going to practice a lot here. But I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and see you in the next one.